Priyanka Motaparthy is a senior researcher for the Emergencies Divisions of Human Rights Watch. Prior to joining the emergencies team, she was a children's rights researcher for the Middle East and North Africa.
Thank you so much. I will restrict myself to three main points. I've been personally visiting Yemen since 2003, and I've been working on the conflict in Yemen as an investigator for Human Rights Watch since 2016. And since that time, we've really been puzzling over this issue of humanitarian access, humanitarian aid, and what was causing the dramatic deterioration of the humanitarian situation in Yemen. And by puzzling, what I want to say is so many people that we speak to would like to see a single, unitary, easy to solve cause for the humanitarian situation in Yemen. They would like to say, this party is to blame, this, particular side is to blame, this particular obstacle, if only we could remove that one large obstacle, then we could solve this issue. But over the years that I've looked at the humanitarian situation in Yemen, speaking to humanitarians working on the ground, humanitarians like Catherine, humanitarians who are Yemeni nationals, working for local organizations, working for international organizations, we've heard that it's not just one factor, but just multiplicity of factors which people have started describing, which people describe as death by 1,000 cuts. What does this mean? So a lot of focus on the humanitarian situation has focused on the naval blockade, the coalition-led naval blockade, which has prevented food from reaching ports in Yemen. And that is certainly a significant and an important factor. But when we've looked closely at the humanitarian situation in Yemen, what we find is that goods, both humanitarian and commercial goods, which are a key part of the picture, as my fellow panelist has pointed out, face obstacles at literally every step of the way. So from the moment they, try to reach the territorial waters of Yemen, the pre-approvals that they need to get, the types of insurances that they need to get, then the permission to enter the port. If goods are able to enter a port in Yemen, the process of leaving that port, the capacity of the port to actually accept, offload goods, and then to transport those goods to other parts of Yemen. What does this mean in human rights terms? Under international humanitarian law, also known as the laws of war, it is prohibited to deny humanitarian aid. It is prohibited for states to deny humanitarian aid, and is prohibited for parties in control of territory to deny humanitarian aid. It is also prohibited to use starvation as a weapon of war. And yet, it has been very, very difficult to advance this argument because there are so many factors contributing to the humanitarian situation. So the blockade is a part of it, but then we also have a number of bureaucratic burdens placed on humanitarians by different parties to the conflict. We have the issue of humanitarian visas. Numerous humanitarian organizations bringing international staff into the country have talked about how difficult it is for them to get visas, both to the north and as well to southern Yemen, depending on the time period and the political situation. We have, multiple examples of Houthi authorities trying to dictate humanitarian programming. So saying, X hospital should not be providing, for example, maternal and infant care. They should be providing only assistance to combatants or assistance to trauma injuries. We also have the attempt to divert aid, to collect beneficiary lists that we see a lot in the north, and to, through these means, control how aid is being distributed. The second point I want to make also builds on Catherine's point, which is how the conduct of hostilities, how the hostilities are being conducted. Human Rights Watch has documented numerous attacks on key civilian infrastructure. Speaking of water points, in late 2016, I visited a village outside of Sana'a called Arhab, where villagers had pooled their money together in order to build a water well. They had hired a drilling rig and worked for months to finance and then execute the project. The well was on the verge of being completed when, in the middle of the night, it was struck. It was hit by an airstrike. In the morning, when people came to collect the bodies of the victims, it was again hit by multiple airstrikes. And this is just one example of how a community struggling to survive has had its chance at a better life, its chance at access to water for farming purposes, water for livelihood, has had that access to a key element necessary for livelihood completely destroyed. I've visited medicine factories, food storage facilities that have been hit by airstrikes as well. On the side of the Houthis, there has been widespread use of landmines since the earliest days of this war in 2015. On my most recent trip to Yemen last month, we again documented widespread use of landmines in the Western Coast operation. And these landmines are not just a problem for victims who are often young children, like 15-year-old Abdu, who I met, who had been fleeing the conflict with his family and lost his leg below the knee. They are also a problem for humanitarian access. We met with multiple humanitarians on the ground who told us that they were restricted to traveling on hard asphalt roads. They could not reach some of the communities that were most in need because those communities were only accessible by traveling on dirt roads. But they couldn't travel on those roads because there was no map of where these mines had been laid. No one could guarantee that they would be safe. The landmines have also destroyed access to livelihoods, and this is, I think, a key third point in looking at the humanitarian situation. Both landmines and the way that hostilities have been conducted more generally have resulted in the destruction of livelihoods that have kept families alive for generations. When we were meeting people fleeing the Western Coast, we met many people who relied for their livelihood on date farming, as well as people who relied on deep-sea fishing. Date farmers told us how they had been caught amidst warring parties, how their date farms had been mined, and how they were no longer able to access those lands, leading to the death of trees that they had cultivated for years and sometimes for decades. Fishermen told us that journeys to the sea that used to take them, 15 minutes, a few hours, now took them days because they had to pass by multiple military checkpoints. And then they risked attack at sea. We interviewed multiple fishermen who had been out in the deep sea waters, attempting to continue their livelihood, only to find themselves attacked by coalition forces. So these 3 points, the bureaucratic obstacles by all parties to the conflict, the conduct of hostilities, the destruction of infrastructure and livelihoods, and finally the long-term effects of the war that prevent people from earning their living have contributed to the dire humanitarian situation we find today.
Thank you so much.